evening. So I'm going to introduce a very special man to you now. I have followed this organization and think that it is one of the best things going in our country today. And I want you to meet Derek Abbey. He's a PhD. Come on over here, Derek. Derek spent 23 years in the United States Marine Corps. After the Marine Corps, his academic research and post-military career focused on connecting veterans with college opportunities. In 2004, he became a team member of Project Recover, a nonprofit using 21st century science and technology to find and repatriate Americans missing in action since World War II. After spending 5 years on the board of directors, he was appointed president and CEO. It is such an honor to have you here, Derek. Thank you for, he came all the way from where?
From Bend, Oregon.
He came all the way from Bend, Oregon, just to speak with us today. So thank you, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Wow, I think like each and every one of you, I'm in a bit of an awe being in this crowd. It's an absolute joy to join you this morning and share a little bit about the Project Recover work. And but yeah, it's always special to come to Boise. I've been here quite a few times. I've been to this museum only one time before, and I know I could spend at least a week, in one section of this museum. It's absolutely incredible. You have a treasure here in the Treasure Valley, that's for sure. But it's also special to reconnect with so many of my friends and colleagues. People that I've served the military community with, my former neighbors, people that I served in the Marine Corps with, and then fellow members of Project Recover. So it's an absolute pleasure to join you today, and I look forward to meeting new friends here in the Warhawk Air Museum. But as mentioned, my name is Derek Abbey, and I'm going to share a little bit about the work of Project Recover. You heard a little bit about my bio. I had a fairy tale career in the Marine Corps, not as much of a fairy tale as some of the stories that I heard this morning, but grew up in the Seattle area, enlisted right out of high school, became a communicator on the enlisted side, was selected for a commission and sent to Oregon State University, where I was ultimately commissioned a ground officer, and then they gave me an aviation contract, and I ended up an F-18 Wizzo, backseater in the F-18, deployed multiple times, did everything you possibly want to do in an F-18 except for an actual air-to-air engagement. Plenty of ground work. Close air support was my favorite mission, supporting all of our fellow service members and those in need on the ground was very near and dear to my heart. But after a successful career, or in the successful time in the Hornet, left the F-18 and became a plank holder or an original member with Marine Special Operations Command. When the Marines created their SOCOM arm, I became a plank holder with the West Coast Battalion and one of the first members of Marine Special Operations Company, Delta. So got to do some work back on the ground with what I call the Smurf Ninjas, doing some great work. Plenty of time in Afghanistan, plenty of time in Iraq, but then they sent me back to school, and I got an advanced degree, and I did the really sexy work of running a schoolhouse as my twilight tour. But I couldn't have it any better, retired in 2019. But in parallel to that, starting in 2004, as mentioned, I became a member of Project Recover. Just by happenstance, and I'm happy to get into that, went to a World War II reunion, met with some World War II cadre from my squadron, met our founder, Pat Scannon, who's currently on a mission in the Baltic Sea, doing a recovery mission and having success, bringing some service members home. Some families are going to have answers that they've been waiting decades for very, very soon. But him and I became fast friends. He invited me to be in the organization. It seemed like the right thing to do. It aligned with my values. And so I agreed. At the time I was deploying quite a bit, so I couldn't go on a mission right away, but finally came back from a deployment in 2007, unpacked a sea bag, packed a suitcase, joined them in Palau, searching the waters and jungles around Palau, and became a part of my first discovery of an MIA site. And it was a member of my squadron from World War II. So, as you can imagine, really no turning back at that point. I was hooked, and I'll kind of talk a little bit, as you like, about the different levels of experiences that our members go through. But this organization is very near and dear to my heart. I've been in fighter squadrons, I've been in team rooms with special operations, and this team is really one of the teams that I am the most proud to be a part of. The selflessness of the members of our organization shines through. They do this blood, sweat, and tears, all sorts of effort to bring answers to families that they don't know. But it's a truly humanitarian effort, it's a unifying effort, and it's really what we need in our nation today. But before I go on, we do have two other members I want to acknowledge in the room. Tom and Tommy Daggett are members of Project Recover, at least. Yeah. I get to get up and hold the microphone and talk a little bit about, but we have a lot of members that are doing incredible work all around the country that don't get the visibility. And it's not about the visibility, but we won't be able to accomplish the mission without every single one of our members. So, you heard what we do. We use technology and every single resource that we can find to ultimately provide answers to families that have waited far too long to find out what happened to their loved ones. We want to locate, ultimately repatriate Americans missing in action from our previous wars. There are more than 80,000 Americans still missing in action from going back to World War II. And that doesn't include people not designated missing in action, but missing still. That includes training accidents that happen off of our coast, in our Great Lakes, in our mountains. If you count those, there's about 100,000 service members that are still missing in action. And we put forth our effort to get that number as close to zero as possible, and we'll talk a little bit about what that work entails. But so when you think about the end of World War II, the United States was fighting for 4 years, and we were ready for the war to be over. The war ended in Europe, the war ended in Japan, and this is what you saw in the streets. Celebration, much deserved celebration at the end of the conflict was here. Our families can be reunited. We can move on with the rest of our lives and hopefully get back to what is normal for our citizens. But that wasn't the case across the nation. People like William Pennell, Walter Mintus, and Ora Shinehouse's families were still waiting in places like Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Illinois, and others across the country. Hundreds of thousands of families were still waiting to learn what happened to their loved ones. And millions of families are still waiting for answers today. So while others were celebrating, they were wondering where their loved ones were. Were they still alive? Are they still alive? What was their fate? Will they ever be home? And they were left with those answers. That big void, that grieving process was interrupted, and that grieving process continues today, passed from generation to generation to generation. So why do we do this work? Who is impacted by it? Well, it starts at the individual level and it goes all the way to the national level, to include, of course, our families and communities. And at the individual level, you can imagine, especially with this audience, when you don the cloth of our nation, you swear an oath to the Constitution. We, as a collective, make a promise to you and your families that should you fall in battle, we'll do everything that we can to bring you home. Well, the context of war doesn't always provide for that to happen. But that promise doesn't have an expiration date. And who's tasked with keeping that promise? We are. We are, as service members, we protect the brothers and sisters in arms to our left and to our right, and we expect the same thing of them to do of us. And when somebody falls in battle, we are the ones that are tasked with bringing them home. And so you can imagine the impact that it has on us as active duty service members and veterans to know that this promise is kept. And of course it makes sense that this has an impact on the families. It has an incredible impact that you can't accurately explain when somebody's repatriated. And it's not just the first-hand members that knew that person one-on-one, perhaps 7, 8 decades ago. It's the generations from then on. They're a mythical status, and when they're repatriated, there's a second wave of impact in their return. We know the freedoms that we live in every single day because of the sacrifices made by those before us, and the sacrifice made by those that are MIA. But when they're returned home, there's a second wave of impact. Families unite around this and communities unite around them. Sometimes family members haven't met before, but communities come together organically. It's not partisan. They come together to acknowledge the sacrifice made by this individual. And that is very important and something that's missing extremely in today's society. So those families and communities are impacted. And now at the national level, that promise that we made to that family and their collective, as a collective, is kept. And trust is reestablished with our nation as a whole. And it sends a message to the next generation. We want our military to continue, we want our citizens to continue to raise their hand and swear an oath to the Constitution, agree to do their part on our behalf. And if we can't keep those promises, their trust in us as a whole or as a nation is diminished. And so we're doing what we can to keep that promise as a collective nation. So, what are the roots of this organization? How did this whole thing start? It wasn't me. I've been doing this for now more than 18 years, but it's actually been going on a little bit longer than that. Pat Scannon, our founder, started this work in 1993. In 1993, he went to the nation of Palau as a member of a different group that was searching for a Japanese trawler that was sunk at the time by Ensign George Herbert Walker Bush. You can see his picture right back there as an ensign. I saw it earlier when I was walking around. At the time, there was rumors that the Japanese trawler that he had sunk wasn't armed, and hints of potential war crimes. Well, they went out searching for this trawler. They found it pretty rapidly at the bottom of the ocean, dove on it, and it was still armed. It was just on the bottom of the ocean. So those rumors weren't true at all. But they found it so quickly and they accomplished their mission so quickly that Pat and his wife had some extra time afterwards to explore the nation of Palau, where a lot of fighting took place, where a gentleman in the back here spent some time on the island of Peleliu, I heard, which is part of the nation of Palau. The Marines landed there. There were 9 air campaigns that took place in and around Palau. Lots of fighting that a lot of people don't know about. So Pat hired a guide, asked him to take him around to some World War II wreckage, and one of the things that he took him to was this wing, 65-foot wing in shallow water. And Pat asked 2 simple questions. What happened to the aircraft, and what happened to the crew? The guy didn't know the answers to that. And so Pat, exercising a little bit of initiative, took it upon himself to find out answers, started researching what happened in and around Palau, and found out about the hundreds of losses and hundreds of missing that are still missing, and took it upon himself to go back and find out more answers. So he started going back to Palau by himself, spent a lot of time in the waters, a lot of time in dense jungles, and realized pretty quickly that this is probably not a mission I should be doing by myself. So he started seeking out like-minded individuals and created what was called at the time the Bent Prop Project. And that's what I joined. Self-funded work, 1 mission a year to the nation of Palau, searching the waters and the jungles of Palau, searching for Americans missing in action. Many times aircraft and the aircrew associated with them, but not only aircrew, also prisoners of war that were ultimately executed in their internment sites in and around Palau. The organization grew. Well, just in case you don't know where Palau is, there, it's the star. Oh, my pointer doesn't work that good. On the lower right, that's the nation of Palau, all the way to the South Pacific, about 500 miles to the east of the Philippines, about 500 miles southwest of Guam. Some significant fighting took place there, and that's where we would do our work. Save up our own money. We do 1 mission a year, all self-funded, and had quite a bit of success. Like I said, my first mission, we found a Marine Corsair in very, very, very dense mangrove jungle, and the Marine associated with that. I mentioned that we search for aviators, but we don't only search for aviators, we search on land and water for also POWs. I mentioned we were the Bent Prop Project, that's our former logo. But one of the things that we do every time we find an MIA site is we have a flag ceremony for that MIA or the MIAs associated with that. We recognize their sacrifice, we state their names, we say a stanza to recognize their sacrifice, and then we fold a flag for every single MIA associated with that site and hold it in safekeeping until it can ultimately be delivered to the family. And sometimes that takes decades. Sometimes you find a site, you might not find the people right away, or it takes a while for a recovery mission to occur, and then you have to go through that identification process. There's a lot that goes into this mission, and it's not a very, very fast mission. Oops. So I said, why are we doing this? We're keeping that promise that we've acknowledged. We're giving back to those that gave the most for our nation. We're also educating the next generation. I don't know how many next generation there are in this crowd, but we do a lot of this at different museums around the nation to expose these stories to exactly that, youth. Sue said it great. People need to hear these stories. They need to know why it's important. They need to know what we stand for as a nation and those that are standing up for those values and sacrificing their life for those values, keeping these stories alive. But it's also the next generation that's going to keep executing this mission. And we work with high schoolers, we work with college students, post-grads, everybody, and we're bringing in younger and younger people all the time that very quickly learn the value of this mission and provide their own efforts and expertise to accomplish it. And it's very, very important. And I mentioned the healing that occurs individual, family, and national level. There's the next generation right there. So we've worked with high schoolers, we've worked with universities. Scripps Institution of Oceanography is a major partner of ours, the University of Delaware. We've brought students from San Diego State University. The students on the lower left are actually high school students from the state of Michigan, Stockbridge High School. They're a robotics team, and they build underwater robots. One thing that's interesting about them is they don't even have a pool at their high school. So they drag in a cow trough, they fill it with water, and they test their robots in that. But we were connected with them. They fell in love with the mission, started fundraising on their own, and they've joined us for 5 different years in Palau, building their robots, fundraising to ship themselves across the world and contribute to this mission. And this is the first class. This is from about 10 years ago. These students are now doing incredible things as young adults, engineers, leaders in the community, giving to the next generation. And we truly feel like exposure to this mission gave them the confidence and encouraged them to do their little, not so little, but often big parts in the greater community. But it's being exposed to these stories that's really, really important. And figuring out how they can do it is really, really important. There's a defense agency, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, DPAA. That is the official DoD agency that's responsible for this mission. They're tasked with repatriating or accounting for 200 missing Americans a year. And that's actually pretty difficult for that organization, which is why we are a partner. In 2015, they established public-private partnerships so we can be an official partner of that organization and supplement their mission, but also do our own unilateral work. So in 2012, we were doing these missions, 1 mission a year in Palau, and by happenstance, we ran into representatives from Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware. Kind of asked, well, what are you doing in Palau? We told them our mission, and we asked, well, what are you doing? And they were doing oceanography work using some pretty incredible robots, automated underwater vehicles, which are little torpedoes that you can program, and they use side-scan sonar to map the ocean floor. And we were like, wow, that's some pretty impressive technology. We have the mission, you have the technology, we should start working together. And that was the beginning of the partnership that was originally called Project Recovery. So in the past, we were using basic scuba to search the ocean floor, which takes a lot of time. And sometimes it takes a lot of time to have success. But now with these robots, we could scan the ocean floor, creating shadows like that so we could find things on the ocean floor that may or may not look man-made. But when we find those points of interest, we could just dive those points, determine if they're man-made, determine if they're aircraft, and save a lot of time. Also, it's a lot safer. If it's really deep, we can send down a remote-operated vehicle to investigate the sites. But this really projected us to the next level. And since then, we've formally established the partnership in 2015, and now we're a worldwide organization and finding incredible success. But just like those shadows of the camels, that's what the side scan does. It shoots out sound waves that create shadows on the ocean floor. So the image on the left, the right, is the ocean floor with coral heads. And believe it or not, there's an aircraft there on the lower right. That actually looks like an aircraft. Usually when you see the side scan sonar, it kind of just looks like another pile of blobs. But it takes a trained eye, and we spend hours upon hours upon hours looking at these really, really ugly images to see if we can find things that we're looking for. But we find success with it. That's the robot that those high schoolers made from Stockbridge, Michigan. That's actually a Japanese Jake. It's not an MIA site, but they were testing it, and I was diving, so I got to get a cool picture of it with the Jake. But that's an example of what high school students can do with given a little bit of motivation. They can do quite a bit. So I told you where Palau is. We start working with Scripps and the University of Delaware in 2012, formalized in 2015, and really ramped our mission up. We're no longer doing 1 mission a year to the nation of Palau. Right now we're doing multiple missions a year all over the world, and this is the landscape that we're covering right now. A couple months ago, we had a team in Croatia doing an underwater search mission. Had incredible success finding 4 sites, 2 of which we were able to document and confirm before we left, both MIA sites associated with 14 missing Americans. So recovery missions will be on the horizon for that. That's not public information, but I guess it is now. Team right now is in Baltic Sea, working on a B-24 site that we located last year they're doing a recovery of that site and have found success, there are families that will have answers to what happened to their loved ones very, very soon. And we're obviously very excited about that. And I'll get into some of the statistics of what we've done in the last few years as we get towards the end. So what's next? Technology continues to advance. You know, when we first started working with Scripps and UDEL, we were super, super excited because we could do 20,000 square meters on a mission per year to a place like Palau or Croatia or wherever we were working. Well, now it's 100,000 square meters that we can do in a few weeks. And the resolution when we were doing this that we were really, really excited about was about 1 meter resolution. Well, now it's 1 centimeter resolution. So I was just up in Maine with a team looking for a marine Hellcat that crashed off the coast there. And we were picking out the lobster traps on the ocean floor. And not only that, the lines that were going up to the surface. And this keeps on bleeding over to other missions. So when you think about finding lobster traps or crab traps on the ocean floor, many of those have been lost. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of those have been lost over the years, but they're still working. So lobsters and crabs still go into them, and then they die, and more lobsters and crabs go into them and eat those and die, and over and over and over again. So now that's bleeding into, well, how do we clean up these lobster traps or these crab traps that are killing millions and millions and millions of crabs or lobsters every year? You never know where this mission's going to take you. We're using all sorts of drones, airborne drones on land to find land sites. Believe it or not, the underwater technology is advancing faster than the land technology. We're going a lot deeper now. Where we were restricted about 100, 150 feet 10 years ago, we've located now sites down to 1,000 feet, and we're not recovering at that level yet, but recovering much deeper than we were before. So very, very exciting times. We've expanded our mission to include recovery, as I've already said. We're bringing on more and more amazing new members that are expanding our mission. And now we're applying machine learning that I talked about, you know, burning our eyeballs out, looking at side scan sonar image. If we can get robots to do that or machines to do that, that advances our mission very, very rapidly and will just take us to the next level. Working with experimental dive teams with the United States Navy to go even deeper on these recovery missions. Really the sky's the limits, or the sea's the limits. I don't know what the proper term is for us, but we don't know what our limits are. We're just going to keep on doing this mission until we don't have any more mission to do. Oh, and actually, that's the newest high school team, and it's an all-female engineer team in Michigan. It's pretty amazing. I mean, every time I run into these students, I'm just completely in awe of what they come up with about how they want to solve this problem. And you give it to them, they're going to figure it out. You know, I'm getting older. They're getting wiser, apparently. I'm not getting any more wiser. But pretty amazing to see. And then that's the airborne drone on a mission over in Italy in a swamp. We were using a magnetometer right from the bottom of that to search that swamp for a missing aircraft. So we have some stories I'll share. This is actually Casey Doyle. Casey Doyle is an active duty Marine still. But in 2004, we found a B-24 that had Casey Doyle's grandfather, Jimmy Doyle, on it. And Jimmy was recovered, repatriated back to his family in Snyder, Texas. And Casey said, well, how do I pay this forward? I can't describe the impact that you've made on my family. My father's life has changed, but I want to give this to future families. So he asked, well, can I be a member? Well, how do you say no to that? You know, it's like, of course you can be a member. And this is Casey coming out of some very, very dense mangrove, getting some well-deserved rest. But that's often what we look like when we come out of the jungle. That's the B-24 that his grandfather was on. And he was interned in Snyder, Texas. But 8 of that crew were repatriated. And ultimately, they had a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery where they were recognized as a collective. The president of Palau came out. And his equal, the High Chief, Reklai, came to the United States to acknowledge the sacrifice made by this crew in giving them their country back. So that's the side scan sonar image you saw before. I want to give you, you know, what do you see? This is what it looks like when you pull it up, and then when you go on the ocean floor, this is what it looks like. About 120 feet deep, we went down and looked on this site. Usually the aircraft are not as intact as this one is. But when we went down and looked at it, They're like, wow, this is a spooky thing with all this black coral growing off of it. And then we looked at the props and we're like, what are these counter-rotating props? This is really interesting. It took us a while to figure out what it was. Turns out that it's a Japanese norm. And at the time, it was the only one known in existence. The Japanese built 9 of them. They were all destroyed in World War II, and we found this one sitting on the bottom of the lagoon in Palau. Incredible. You can still see the machine gun sticking out of the back there, completely intact. Huge discovery on our part, not MIA related, but just pretty cool. And then a few years later, we found a second one in Chuuk. So there's only 2 known in existence, and we just happen to find both of them. We find a lot of things that we're not looking for. As you can imagine, we find former enemy aircraft and sites like that. We've probably found just as many Japanese aircraft as we found American aircraft. We found German aircraft, Italian aircraft. We find ships. We find ancient sites. We find all sorts of different things. We always have an archaeologist with us. So when we find an ancient site, you know, they get really, really excited, and we're kind of like, well, is there aluminum? No? Okay, next. You know, they're like, no, this is a dissertation worth of work. Like, okay, we'll stop for a little bit. You got 10 minutes, you know. But it is pretty exciting. I mentioned my colleague Mark found that underwater site in Croatia. They also found a Roman ship while they were looking for it. Anything that we find is documented and preserved. All that information, of course, is turned over to the host nation, wherever we're at. If it's a former enemy aircraft potentially associated with their MIAs, we turn that over to that nation via their embassy to ensure that if they want to take action on it, they can take the appropriate action. All this is protected. All the sites are protected, and they're treated with the utmost respect, whether they're ours or anybody else's. I mentioned we don't only look for aircraft. In the history of the UDTs and the SEALs, there's only 3 that have not been recovered. They were captured off a Yap, ultimately transported to Palau where they were executed. So we are looking for their internment site, as well as other service members, other aviators, some Catholic priests, and others. So it's not just aviators that we're looking for. A few other little things, you know, very, very hard work. Sometimes you're not successful. You spend weeks and weeks looking for something, you don't find it, but at least hopefully you know where not to look the next time. But it's blood, sweat, and tears. It's tiring. And sometimes you need a little bit of a reminder of what it is that you're doing. We were the bent prop project. That was because every time we'd find an aviation site, there would be a bent prop associated with that. And I guarantee you, every single member at some point would go over and touch that prop. It was the piece that was driving that aircraft through the air and keeping them alive before their last moments. Or other things. You'll go through the jungle. Typically, the aluminum is bleached. And every once in a while, you'll turn over a piece of aluminum, and the blue paint on the other side is there that says American. Well, this Avenger site, when we found it, right in the middle of that Avenger was a spoon, and you can see what's carved into it, USN. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I used to keep a spoon in my pocket. When I was in the field or deployed and I had an opportunity to eat, I wanted to make sure I had the appropriate utensils to take advantage of that. If not, I was using my fingers, which I was fine with. And when I see this spoon, that's exactly what I think back to those moments. And that crew had just left the galley or was heading back to the galley once they completed this mission, and unfortunately didn't make it back. We did the recovery on this site. Remains weren't accounted for, but they found 1 dog tag for Paul Binsman. And that was ultimately returned to his family in Alton, Illinois. And that family now has answers. They did a ceremony in Alton, Illinois, and you would have sworn that he was there. But it was just his dog tag, but they had answers. And the entire community came out. We were invited to participate and bear witness to it. And I can't accurately put into words. It's life-changing for the families, and it's obviously just as life-changing for us. This is one last article I'll show you, and this is a ramp ceremony. And typically when remains are brought back to either Hawaii or Nebraska for the labs there, they'll do a ramp ceremony and render appropriate honors. But believe it or not, this newspaper is not from the United States. This is from Palau. And when we found this gentleman, William Pinnell, the president of Palau demanded that a ramp ceremony take place before he departed. And the president was there. All their political representatives and their tribal representatives and community leaders and community were there to pay their respects and acknowledge that they have their family or their country because of the sacrifice made by these individuals. pretty impressive to see. So when I talk about the individual, family, community, and national impact that happens at home, we witness the same thing in the nations that we work in, the impacts that this work has on them. And I mentioned Ora Scharninghaus, Walter Mintus, and William Pinnell. Well, I gave it away for William Pinnell. These stories are complete. They've been found, they've been brought home, and that's what success looks like for us. William Pinnell being interned at Arlington National Cemetery. That flag ceremony that we had, flag is being delivered to Sister Joe, and children lining the streets of Portage, Pennsylvania on a very, very cold November day to pay their respects when somebody is brought home, in this case, Walter Mintus. But ultimately, that is why we do that. We as a collective make a promise, and we're going to do what we can to keep that promise. So since 2015, we've done more than 60 missions to 21 different countries. We've documented more than 60 sites associated with more than 200 Americans missing in action. The work continues. I keep that plus there because the good thing is that number keeps on changing in a positive way. It keeps on increasing. 15 have been repatriated. 70 have been designated missing at sea or buried at sea because they will not be disturbed. And more than 100 of those cases are open. So recovery missions have been executed. We're waiting on identification to occur, or a recovery mission needs to be executed to bring them home. All active cases. Last year we had a full-length documentary released on our work, 81 minutes Hollywood documentary. That's been pretty incredible. I've been on tour across the United States, literally around the world, sharing the film. It's been very, very well received. But we're very proud of it, not because it highlights us doing things in the field, but they did an incredible job of highlighting the impact that this work has on families across the country and why it's important that we continue to do this work. If you want to watch it, it's on Amazon, Google, Apple TV, all those things, or maybe we can set up an event here at this beautiful museum or something like that. But it's out there. So we are a national nonprofit. We rely on the charity of the public to execute this mission. We have a partnership with the Department of Defense, but that doesn't pay for this entire mission. So if you're interested in supporting in any way, whether it's being a member, if you have an MIA in your family and information related to that, we encourage you to reach out to us. But of course, we're a charity, so we seek that uncle with $1 million as well, and we'll figure out a way to highlight your name if that's the case as well. $2 million, because $1 million goes to the new edition, and then $1 million comes to us. We're on all the social media platforms out there. Of course, we have a website, projectrecover.org. Please follow us. Please comment, support. Say you like our work. Reach out to us if you think that this message would be good for an organization that you're a part of, or you want us to share the movie or something like that with you. We love to do this. We love to get out in the community. I'm definitely taking a selfie before I walk off because my media people are going to demand that. And a crowd like this, you can't miss. But with that, I'm going to share a quick video with you of what it's like to find a site, and then I'll open it up to questions.
And then we come into the main debris field, and the first thing I see is a propeller. Finally, after 22 years, we are looking at Lieutenant Hull's Avenger. You're in 70 or 80 feet of water and you just don't know whether you want to scream or cry.
Is victory. It's just victory. I mean, there's families that don't know what's going to happen to them now because they're going to have a lot of questions and answered finally after all these years.
With that, I'll open it up to questions. Or did I answer them all? While you think of them, I'll get my selfie. Okay. All right, I'm going to take a picture. For the Marines in the audience, don't flip off the camera. Smile. All right.
Okay, questions?
There's one here. We'll come to you next.
Are there like organizations in other nations that you work with?
Great question. The question of like organizations in other nations. I'll start actually with the United States. So especially since DPA created public-private partnerships, there's been other organizations created or trying to do similar work. In the United States, we are the only fully vertical non-government agency out there, meaning we do everything from research to search and documentation to recovery, and on both land and water. Now, other organizations do pieces of that. Universities are involved as well in a variety of ways. As far as other nations, the United States is a very unique organization in the sense that they have a Department of Defense that's committed to this mission. No other nation does that. However, there have been growing groups in different countries that have been interested in it and trying to do work. They don't do it to the level that we do. Typically, there's like a family connection of some sort, or there's just people that are interested in history. And we do run into those organizations that, whether it's, hey, we're just interested in aviation history and finding these sites. That's huge in Italy. And you run into some of these Italians that know more about our aviation than we do. It's absolutely incredible. But every one of them that we've run into has been very willing to support us and work with us in executing this mission. So not to the level that we are, but there are a few out there. I can get it.
Are identities confirmed via genetic studies?
Great question. The question was on basically how does the identification process take place? And genetics or DNA, of course, is used, and that's advancing very, very rapidly, but that's not the only thing. So when a recovery takes place, all osseous material is collected. So bones is usually all there is, but sometimes more. And then any other artifacts that can assist with the identification are collected. So that could be rings, dog tags, life-saving gear, all sorts of different things. And then all that is brought back to a lab and identification is done blindly. Usually by that point, we're pretty confident with who we have because we've identified the aircraft, exactly which aircraft it is. So if it's a single crewed aircraft, that makes it a lot easier, one person in it. Multi-crew aircraft narrows it down, but all that's brought back to the lab and they use everything to assist with the identification, to include DNA. But also dental records are huge. And then examining bones, so this person broke their leg when they were 7 and their left leg is broken, it looks like when they were 7. And then all those artifacts, so there's an intersection and triangulation to assist with that identification. But sometimes, if it's just one bone or something like that, yeah, the genealogy is done to determine the next of kin, hopefully a sample's collected, and then they can make a DNA match using that. But usually it's a combination of all sorts of different things.
So is that testing done in military labs?
Yeah, so we can't do the official identification. That is restricted by Title 10 to the Department of Defense, and it's done at a lab typically either in Hawaii or Nebraska is where the Defense POW accounting agency has their labs. And then there's also a DoD DNA lab in Dover. Great questions.
Are there any nations that are not letting you in?
Grace, the question was, are there any nations not letting you in? We haven't asked all the nations. Ones that we expect negative answers to, we kind of don't. So we're able to execute this mission with the support of every host nation that we work with. We haven't tried to access like a North Korea or something like that, or China's becoming more complicated. And unfortunately, the expansion of China's presence in the Pacific is also making our mission more complicated, specifically in areas like the Solomon Islands and things like that. We've been to the Solomons in the past, but now it's becoming more difficult, for lack of a better term. But for the most part, our nations that we're friendly with, we have a strong diplomatic relationship with, are very, very supportive. And even if we're not doing an official DPAA mission, we'll go through the appropriate channels, diplomatic channels, to get the permits needed to do this work. And what we discover is that once we're in country, you know, the locals are like, these people are looking for gold or whatever it is that they think we're doing. Once they realize that we're not on a treasure hunt, that we're searching for our missing service members, they quickly find a values overlap and become very, very supportive of that mission. Italians, Palauans, troop all over the world, they become very, very supportive, and it becomes their mission. Yeah, so we, actually our most recent
Why don't
repatriation...
you ask the question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the question was, is Vietnam cooperating? And Vietnam is very cooperative with this mission right now. We've been to Vietnam a couple times. The harder part of Vietnam is so much Department of Defense work is done there that they kind of really try to control that. And so only recently have they started bringing in partners like us. Our most recent repatriation actually was Major Paul Abbey's B-52 navigator who was lost in Vietnam, was repatriated to Springfield, Oregon. And I did want to mention William Pinnell's family has a presence in Idaho. His nephew was here, so when we were contacting the family, this is where we were communicating with them from. So yes, but we're working in Vietnam. The Vietnamese are very supportive. The numbers breakdown usually catches people off guard. So that 82,000 number is 72,000 about from World War II, 7,000 from Korea. And we've done a lot of work in Vietnam and around Vietnam. So now there's less than 1,600 still missing from that conflict. And of course, it's not right until it's zero, but we're making progress. So the question was, have other Americans been returned by other countries doing similar searching? So not necessarily by other organizations or official organizations doing this. What we've discovered is like development is taking place all over the world. Time is not our friend. So as they're developing, putting in something in a new area, they clear a space and they find something. Hopefully they report that, and then if it's MIA related, remains are recovered. Sometimes that occurs and sometimes it doesn't. So as you can imagine, if it's a developer and they're like, oh, this is going to slow us down, they may or may not report it. If it's a fisherman that pulls something up off the ocean floor, they may or may not report it. Hopefully they do, and there's plenty of cases where that has occurred. And then we've found missing MIAs, of course, that we've turned, as I mentioned, over to other countries. But no, not official efforts. I mean, the Vietnamese actually have been very, very supportive in a joint mission, but it's our mission in working with them to find this. Sir? The question was, any monetary support from our government or other government agencies? We don't have any support from other government agencies, but as an official partner with DPA, they come to us with mission specific. So can you go do X? And we'll do that. It's small capacity, not sustainable. I wish I didn't have to, but I still got to fundraise. You can come over here and I'll come back to you, Dan. Sir?
Are you tied into any record keeping, libraries, archives? How's that all work?
Yeah, so the question was, are we tied into records, archives, museums, all sorts of different things? Yes. So we have a full-time PhD historian. That is what he does. He conducts research. Never gets the credit he deserves. He's spending those hours in the bottom of a basement reading all sorts of different things, although during COVID he's been more behind his computer. But that's where it all starts. So it starts in the National Archives. It starts in museums like this. It's interacting with families, and they say, I got a notebook, I have something. They give it, and then that's where the research starts, and we build a case out of that. So we proactively add to a database on a regular basis, building cases. And right now our database has about 700 cases associated with about 3,000 missing Americans, and that's actionable information. So if we had the resources available, we could start executing those missions right away. And then all the time, families are reaching out to us and interacting with them. And I didn't really go into it. I did talk about this grief that's passed from families throughout generations. But they'll reach out to us, express that they have an MIA in their family. And the first thing that we do is acknowledge and confirm that loss and sacrifice made by their families. And many times, it might be close to 8 decades since that person was lost, and this is the first time that anybody's done that. They might have received a telegram, and that's it. And that's very, very impactful work. To me, it's probably the biggest impact that we make as a collective. You can imagine an individual comes home, that's massive. But the hundreds of family members that we're reaching or we're connecting with regularly, and then the tens of thousands beyond that, beyond the point of contact that are receiving this is pretty significant. And just knowing that somebody from their community that they don't know is working on their behalf or doing this mission is pretty significant. And we've had some amazing testimonials from family members saying just that and why this is important. Sir.
So in your work with EPA, or DEPMA, as people used to call it, for these returns that you collect for them and send off to their labs, they give you the results of whatever they come up with.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, so the work that we do, we turn over to DPA, are they communicating with us in keeping us abreast of the mission and stuff? Sometimes. Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we have to ask or pester or other things, and sometimes they forget. We try and stay on top of them, and because yeah, they will forget, and it's a massive bureaucratic organization with different silos, and so believe it or not, when somebody's identified, it turns over to casualty affairs as if the person was killed yesterday overseas, and that casualty affairs officer starts working with the families, and they don't necessarily know all the efforts that took place. So we have had that happen, and actually most recently, where casualty affairs officer just moved forward, started interacting with the family, didn't say anything, and then the family didn't find out about anything until it all became public, and they found out that we located the site, repatriated the remains, all that stuff, and reached out to us, and we're like, we had no clue that this was the work that you were doing. Now we hope that that's not the case. We like to have the opportunity to interact with them, and we don't ask for anything ever. And they have been very, very generous. Most families have been very, very generous in keeping us a part of the memorial and celebration and allowing us to bear witness to that, which is very, very special to us. I mentioned that, I was part of that discovery of my squadron mate, and I say people go through 3 different phases. They want to become a member, it aligns with their values, it's the right thing to do, and they become a member of our organization. And then it could be that year, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be somewhere down the road, that they're a part of a discovery. And now this becomes real. Like, it's been 8 decades I've been working on this, all blood, sweat, and tears, and now, holy smokes, we're the first people to lay eyes on this since it was lost. And that takes it to a whole nother level. And then that last level is somebody's repatriated, and you get to bear witness to that memorial and see the impact that this has on families and communities. And it's life-changing, as I mentioned, for those families, but also for us. And we are not, most of our members have either a military background, first responders, but they're not required to have that. And one of the things that I say is, I started this work 18 years ago, and I would do it with my leave time. And when I left the military, that perceived loss of purpose when you take the uniform off didn't occur, because I already could see the impact that the work that I was doing now, of my new mission, or whatever you want to call it. And it's very, very similar for our members. And I mean, imagine what that's like for an 18-year-old that gets to participate in this as a very, very young adult, or maybe not even an adult yet.
Well, I'm sure that folks can come up and talk afterwards. If that's okay, you're going to stick around. How long do you have? I know you've got to catch a flight.
Yeah, I have about 40 minutes.
Oh, good. 4 minutes. 40 Get up. Start running. Let's give this. Let's just say thank you so much to Derek. This is incredible. You're coming here. Okay, Warhawk. Thank you. And before we finish, I just want to introduce someone very special to us. If Helen will get out of the way. I'm just kidding you. This is Lance Stevenson. Lance is one of our own. He was the man who headed on our flight for 5 years in a row for our World War II veterans. And Lance is the child of a man who was repatriated. His father was a F-4 pilot out of Mountain Home. He grew up in Mountain Home. He was shot down over Vietnam. and lost for how many years?
21 years.
21 years before his brother, who became a part of the POW MIA organization out of Gowan Field, went to Vietnam and brought their father's remains home. So I know the effect on your family was pretty incredible.
Still is.
So these organizations are so important in what they're doing, and aren't we so blessed to have this in amongst us and have these people here. So thank you.
Just real quick, I know you guys want to go. When he was talking about the DPAA, we've been involved with them since I was 9 years old. The fact is our government wanted us to forget about Vietnam and move on. And we said, wait a minute, we got a father, husband over there, we want to find out what happened to him. We may not ever find out what happened to him, but if you don't try, then you're denying everybody that you signed the oath with that said, we'll do everything we can to find you. So DPAA over the years got better and stronger, and I think Derek has seen the results, and I'm not bragging because I didn't do it all, but I did a little bit, is that we made sure they didn't say, get over it to us ever again. And DPAA has done a lot. You know, you're talking about mitochondrial DNA, so anybody that's related to them, we get the DNA. Now we can make identifications based on the smallest amount of remains that we are recovered. We got lucky with my dad. They knew where he went down, 40 miles northwest of Hanoi, outbound of the target, the Paul Domer Bridge, and they didn't make it. And I think there's a lot more families out there. There's 1,582 still missing in Vietnam. And before everybody from World War II and Korea, and I'm just stating the fact, is the National League of POW MIA families was instrumental in making sure that the Vietnam veteran was brought home. In the meantime, we went 20-some years before the World War II families start saying, well, wait, you know, we want to find out what happened too, and we go, we've been waiting for you. Get on board. Well, now they're on board. DPAA is doing a great job. They're repatriating. I see it almost daily where they're finding World War II remains, or they're even going back to the punch bowl in Hawaii, and they're making sure they have all those guys identified as well. It's a humbling experience. It's an honor to be able to be there pushing our government in the back. I see why, as a nonprofit, that he doesn't use the government, because the government won't push you, they'll pull you back. And a nonprofit can move forward at a speed that is lightning compared to what our government seems to be able to want to do. So to Derek, thank you for what you do, my friend. And to all you guys that serve, thank you.
I haven't stood up in a while.
Well, everyone have a great month, October. Hopefully it's going to be spectacular, and we will see you in November. Thanks for being here, and thank you for being who you are and serving our country. We are so honored to have you all here.